From the arcade to your living room, video game consoles have been around to entertain us for decades. From Atari to Nintendo to Sony and Microsoft, companies over the years have tried creative ways to create entertainment systems for people to enjoy at home. Today on Feed My Curiosity, we will begin with the first part of our three-part series on the history of video game consoles. We will focus on the first two generations of video game consoles, including who developed the first major console, who were the major players of the video game market at the time, and what hardware features did these consoles have that would influence future generations. Find out today on Feed My Curiosity. If you like learning about science, technology, history, and other subjects, don't forget to help us grow and show your support for Feed My Curiosity by pressing the subscribe button. In the 1950s, the first kind of video games were developed on mainframe computers through text-only displays or computer printouts. Simple games like tic-tac-toe and tennis for two were born. In 1962, the world's first action video game was developed when a group led by Stephen Russell at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology developed Space War on a PDP-1. The total cost to develop this was $140,000, equivalent to about $1.2 million if it were developed today. Meanwhile, Ralph Baer wanted to find a way for millions of Americans to play video games on their own television sets.
Living room at night, watching TV, with the all-purpose box, which you see over there, sitting alongside the TV set, somewhat innocuously.
In 1967, Ralph at Sanders Associates developed a prototype that would make it possible, called the Brown Box, which was the first ever multiplayer, multi-program video game system. It had such games as ping pong, checkers, a light gun shooting game, golf putting, as well as 4 sports games. The Brown Box was patented by Sanders Associates and licensed to Magnavox. The resulting product was the Magnavox Odyssey, the world's first ever home video game console. In 1971, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney from Nutting Associates were inspired by Space War. Do you still remember what we discussed about Space War? Here's a little pop quiz to test your knowledge. What year was Space War developed? A. 1959, B. 1960, C. 1961, D. 1962. Do you think you know the answer? Leave your response in the comments below. Inspired by Space War, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney developed Computer Space, the first coin-operated arcade game in 1971. Shortly after, the duo, along with Alan Acorn, formed Atari Incorporated. In 1972, the company released its first video game, Pong. Based on table tennis, players would control a paddle and hit a ball back and forth. The graphics were as simple as two-dimensional white pixels on a black background. It became an iconic look as Pong grew to be the world's first commercially successful video game, selling over 8,000 units by 1974. In the same year, Harold Lee came up with the idea of allowing people to take Pong home and play it on their television sets. Pong Home became an instant hit. Through its 1975 limited release with Sears, 150,000 units were sold. Eventually, other companies began to release their own imitations of Pong and Home Pong. In 1976, Coleco Telstar made its debut in the video game market. This video game console was known as its first Pong-in-a-chip system because it was the first to use General Instruments' AY3-8500 CPU chip. Featuring just 3 games, Pong Clone, Hockey, and Handball, it became a huge success because of its low price of $50. Families who were on a budget and couldn't afford the more expensive consoles had an option. Over 1 million units were sold. More models of the Coleco Telstar with more games would be made, including the Ranger in 1977, the Arcade 1977, and the Combat, and Marksman in 1978. Magnavox Odyssey, Pong, Coleco Telstar would mark the first generation of video game consoles. Another video game console was released in North America in 1976 by Fairchild Semiconductor, a semiconductor company based in San Jose, California. The Fairchild Channel Fun, or Channel F, would be the first console to play games with ROM cartridges, thus marking the start of the second generation. The console came with tennis and hockey pre-installed and included an additional 21 officially released cartridges that were available for purchase. It was also the first time players would be able to compete against the CPU. A year later, later, Atari would come along with its release of the Atari Video Computer System, or the Atari VCS, later rebranded as the Atari 2600. Like the Channel F, it used ROM cartridges to play games and also popularized the use of microprocessors. These two components would become essential in the video gaming industry for decades to come. Bundled with its famous joystick, the Atari 2600 would become North America's best-selling Christmas gift in 1979. The console had a wide range of games available for people to play, including Space Invaders and fan favorite Pac-Man, which would go on to become the most popular Atari 2600 title, selling over 7 million copies by 1982. The final second-generation console, the Mattel Intellivision, was released in 1980. This was a reputable competitor to the Atari 2600 because its hardware specifications were more advanced, and unlike the Atari's joystick, the Intellivision's controller had a numpad, clear and enter buttons, and a control disc, which was criticized by some for its awkward feel. Nevertheless, it was still able to sell out within its first year it went on sale across America. The Intellivision and the 2600 would continue to dominate the early 1980s until the video game crash, also known as the Atari Shock, happened in 1983. What followed the crash was a resurgence led by a company we are all familiar with today, Nintendo.
More hits like Super Mario Brothers. Sports hits like Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Nintendo has the most video game hits, Hogan's Alley, The Legend of Zelda, and more like Metroid, Rad Racer, and you can play them only on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now you're playing with power.
All of this and more will be covered in part 2 of our series on the history of gaming consoles. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more things related to science, technology, history, and tons of other subjects, don't forget to click the subscribe button. Click the like button as well to help us grow so we can produce more content for you. And now to the results of our pop quiz. In what year was Space War developed? A. 1959, B. 1960, C. 1961, D. 1962. If you said D, 1962, then congratulations, you are correct. If you guessed incorrectly, don't worry, there's still opportunity to test your video game console knowledge in the next part of our video. Until next time, thank you for joining us on Feed My Curiosity. Take care.